When Hartwell Construction called asking for me specifically, Kevin had already told them I no longer made decisions at Barrett Hardware. The man on the phone said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am, we've done business with a lot of suppliers over the years, and there's only one person at that company who actually knows what she's selling. Let me take you back to how it all started. I opened Barrett Hardware in 1984 with $11,000 and a folding table. My husband, Roy, had just passed from a heart attack at 51, and I had 2 kids, a mortgage, and no plan. Roy's brother offered to buy the house. I thanked him and said no. I rented a storefront on Maple Street instead and figured the rest out as I went. I remember the first winter. I sold $37 worth of merchandise in an entire week. I didn't tell Roy's mother. I just kept going. I didn't know everything about hardware in those early years. But I learned fast. I read manufacturer catalogs until midnight. I drove to job sites and asked contractors what they actually needed, not just what was listed on the order form. I built relationships with farmers, builders, county inspectors, people who needed a supplier they could call on a Saturday morning when something went wrong. 40 years later, Barrett Hardware had 3 locations and 14 employees. We'd helped build half the county. I knew the names of most of the contractors in a 50-mile radius. Most of them knew mine. Kevin came into the business 12 years ago. I was glad for it. I taught him the books, the seasonal rhythms, the vendor relationships I'd spent decades building. He was sharp and he worked hard. I was proud of him. Then he married Brenda. Brenda has an MBA. That's not a criticism. Education matters. But Brenda came with a particular kind of confidence, the kind that isn't always comfortable being in the room with someone who's been doing the thing longer. The first moment I really felt it was a Tuesday in March, about 2 years ago. I arrived early, as I always do, and found a new inventory system being installed on every computer in the store. No one had mentioned it to me. I went to Kevin's office, and he shrugged and said Brenda had researched it and it was more efficient. I asked if they'd considered that our vendors used a different coding system, and the integration would be a headache. He told me Brenda had already handled it. She hadn't. We spent 4 months fixing that rollout. I stayed patient. Kevin was still learning what it meant to run a business, not just manage one. I told myself things would settle. Then one morning in June, I found something on my desk that stopped me cold. It was a typed memo. Signed by Kevin and Brenda, jointly. It proposed a new title for me, Founder Emeritus and Consultant. Effective the 1st of the following month. My purchasing authority and vendor relationships would transfer to Brenda. I would remain, they wrote, a valued advisor. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in my purse. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of anyone. I went home that evening and sat in Roy's old armchair by the window with a cup of tea. I thought about what he would have said. Roy always said the same thing when something shook me, "Maggie, you built it. Don't forget what that means." I didn't forget. The next morning I told Kevin I'd accept the new arrangement on one condition: I kept my office and my direct phone line. He looked surprised I'd agreed so easily. Brenda looked like she'd already moved on. Maybe they both thought it was over. I understood why they thought that. Over the next 8 months, I kept showing up. Not loudly. Not to argue or prove anything in the moment. I just kept doing what I had always done. I answered my phone. I had lunch with contractors I'd known for 20 and 30 years. I remembered their kids' names, their project timelines, what coffee they took. I visited job sites just to ask how things were going. I brought people coffee sometimes. I listened. And I kept a small notebook, names, concerns, upcoming projects, things people needed that the catalog didn't make easy to order. Old habit. Roy always teased me about my notebooks. Brenda was redesigning the catalog. Kevin was running LinkedIn ad campaigns to attract new accounts. I was having Tuesday breakfast with a man named Dale Hartwell. Dale ran Hartwell Construction. I'd known his father before him, sold him copper pipe in 1991. Dale was now overseeing the most significant project this county had seen in decades, a new stadium complex. He needed a primary hardware supplier for the entire build. Fasteners, structural components, specialty safety equipment, and specialty items I won't bore you with but that most suppliers can't source without a long lead time. The total contract value was more than everything Barrett Hardware had built in the previous 5 years combined. Dale and I had been discussing the details quietly for about 3 months. I hadn't mentioned any of it to Kevin or Brenda. I want to tell you exactly why that was. I waited because I needed to confirm our suppliers could handle the volume. That was the practical reason. But if I'm being honest, there was something else. I needed to understand what kind of people my son and his wife had become, whether they'd pushed me aside out of ambition, or whether they'd simply stopped seeing me clearly. That Monday morning gave me my answer. Kevin called me into his office looking animated. Hartwell Construction had sent an inquiry about the stadium project. He and Brenda were already preparing a digital presentation, automated ordering portal, new client interface, all the technology they'd been building. They didn't mention wanting me in the meeting. The meeting was set for Thursday. Wednesday evening, my phone rang. It was Dale. "Maggie," he said, "I got a meeting request from your son's email. I want to ask you directly, are you still involved with Barrett Hardware?" I said, "I'm the founder. I'm always involved." "Good," he said. "Because I'm not signing a contract unless you're the one walking me through it. I shook your hand 20 years ago when you found me reclaim timber for my father's barn. That's the kind of business I do." He paused, then added, "I hope that's not going to be a problem on your end." I told him it wasn't going to be a problem at all. I arrived early on Thursday. I wore the navy blazer that Roy always said made me look like I meant business. I brought a folder I'd been building quietly for 3 months, my own notes on Dale's project specs, supplier contacts, pricing I'd already confirmed with vendors. Kevin arrived and stopped when he saw me at the head of the table. Brenda said, pleasantly but clearly, "Margaret, this meeting might get technical." "You really don't have to." "Dale asked for me specifically," I said. "I'll be leading this." That room was very quiet for about 4 seconds. Dale walked in, shook my hand first, and said, "Maggie. Good to see you." What happened over the next 90 minutes wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No confrontation. I walked Dale through every item on his project list. I knew which suppliers could handle his specialty fasteners without a 6-week delay. I knew the lead times on structural components. I had a manufacturer in Ohio who could expedite. I had names, prices, and confirmed availability, all in that folder. Kevin sat quietly. He pulled up the digital portal on his tablet at one point. Dale glanced at it, nodded politely, and then turned back to me and asked about the Ohio supplier's track record. I told him. He wrote it down. At the end of the meeting, Dale said he'd have his team send the contract. He wanted my signature on it alongside Kevin's as current director. He shook my hand again at the door. After Dale left, the 3 of us sat in the conference room. Kevin looked at my folder. He said, "You've been working on this for months." "Yes," I said. Brenda said quietly, "We didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't ask." Kevin was quiet for a long moment. I thought about Roy. I thought about the folding table in 1984. I thought about every Tuesday morning I had ever spent driving to a job site before 7 in the morning. No anger in my voice. I meant it as information, not accusation. There's a difference, and I believe they both heard it. Kevin asked what I wanted. I told him I didn't want a war. I wanted my title back, not founder emeritus, not consultant. Co-director of operations. Equal signing authority on contracts above $50,000. A seat at the table for major vendor decisions. Kevin agreed before Brenda could respond. The Hartwell contract closed 6 weeks later. Largest single deal in the history of Barrett Hardware. My name is on it, first line, above Kevin's. I had the signature page framed. It hangs in my office next to a photo of Roy standing in front of the empty storefront on Maple Street, grinning like he couldn't believe what we were about to do. I still come in early on Tuesdays. Brenda and I are not close friends. But we're civil, and increasingly we're something better than civil, we're useful to each other. She's learning that a vendor relationship is a long game. I'm learning to let her change things I would have done differently, and to trust that different isn't always wrong. I built something real. Not just a business. I built it with my word and my time and 40 years of showing up for people who needed someone they could count on. Nobody takes that from you. Not really. The relationships you build are yours. The knowledge you carry is yours. All they can do is forget it for a little while. Roy's photo still makes me smile every time I pass it. The hardware store on Maple Street is still standing, by the way, the original location. We kept it. I insisted. Sometimes, all it takes is one phone call to remind them. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to quietly prove yourself to someone who had already decided you were finished? I'd love to hear your story.